Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Fromage from R2I Games. Fromage is a 1 to 4 player worker placement and cheese making game, and this over here is a prototype. Everything you see, rules, components, etc., subject to change. In particular, rules subject to change. We'll be talking about some rules that have already changed and evolved since the prototype I have in front of me, which will make some things interesting to get to. I'll also have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below, and please note that while this is not a paid review, the publisher R2I Games is engaging in other paid content on the channel, so please take that into account. And with that, this game, like I said already, is a worker placement game. You're going to have this board over here, and this board is going to be rotating every single round, allowing players to operate simultaneously. Players are each going to have their own region that they are facing, and you're going to be operating within your own region, which means while this is a 1 to 4 player game, players are acting independently, acting simultaneously, taking their actions, and then when they're all ready, you're going to rotate the board and take the next round of actions. You're trying to effectively get your little pieces of cheese into the board in each of these areas in different ways so that they can score, and each region will score differently, but ultimately, you want your cheese on the board in all of these regions, or more specifically, you probably want to focus on like 3 of them and kind of ignore one. You'll be able to get a lot more points if you can really focus your energies on regions and double down on those regions. Additionally, you're going to be placing your workers over here on other spots on the board in order to get additional resources from these 4 pools over here. You're going to have the strawberries, which are going to convert to jam, so strawberries you're going to be taking and putting on your board. You're going to have buildings, which will allow you to build out your own individual buildings, recipe cards, which we'll explain those soon, and then cows over here, which go onto your player board and will give you additional cheese placement options to be able to get a little bit more cheese onto the board faster as you play. On a typical turn, let's take a few turns and start setting things up, and then I'll explain how everything scores. But on a typical turn, what you're going to do is you're going to take 2 of your workers, up to 2. You could do less, you could do more, you could do 0, 1, or 2 workers, and you're going to place 1 in this little region over here in order to get some degree of resources. So for example, I'm going to place that person down there in order to get 1 cattle, which will go into my pool over here. It's worth noting over here, this board is already changed. This is an area where the prototype is different than the game currently where it's at, so we'll explain more how this works, but all you need to know right now is the cows are going on the board. Additionally, I'm going to go ahead and take this other cheese, and let's go ahead and take a cheese. This area on the board is going to involve you effectively placing down a cheese and placing your worker. So for example, let's say for example that we're going to go ahead and place this worker over here. You'll notice that that area has a strawberry on it, so we're going to have to pay a strawberry into the grid over here. We're going to pay a strawberry, and we're going to make that strawberry into strawberry by placing it over there, and then place my worker down. Assuming the other players have all gone, let's go ahead and have this worker just start placing things out. This worker, we're not going to really worry heavily about things, just a drop as far as, additional placement. In fact, you know what, for the sake of simplicity, we may not worry about it at all. We're going to go ahead and rotate the board right now, so we're going to rotate the regions, and then we're going to go to the next round. Assuming everyone's gone, we're going to take a look at any workers that are facing me. This worker over here has a check mark on them. They're facing me, which means I can take it back. That's a good time to notice that depending on how you place a worker, they're going to come back to you in 3, 2, or the next turn. So for example, if I place a worker here, next round is going to be facing that way, next round will be facing that way, and then it'll come back to me. Whereas if I place a worker facing me already, if I place a worker facing 1 away, as soon as the board turns, they're going to come back to you. So you're basically trying to time these workers as far as how they go on the board in order to figure out when they come back to you. Over here, we're on to this next grid over here. It looks like red already took that spot. We're going to have red just slowly drop cheese around the board to simulate the board, but we're not going to heavily focus on their workers. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take 2 recipe cards because I kind of want to grab those recipe cards. So I'm going to go ahead and slot this guy up here. And by the way, you should note, you have to match the type of cheese. This is a blue worker on blue cheese. Over here, you can do whatever you want. So I'm going to go ahead and place that one down over there. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab 2 recipe cards because this is the recipe card area. We're going to take a look. These recipe cards allow us to fulfill certain recipes depending on what we do as we make cheese. So for example, if we were to go ahead and use this worker to make a cheese, we have another opportunity over here to do so. So we're going to go ahead and place this worker down here. That's going to, again, cost a strawberry, so we're going to slide that down. Now, because of the fact that we're going onto this shelf, we're going to get a strawberry from the supply. This area over here is going to give you various things for the shelves that you're on. Again, a good time to note that some of these areas are changing, so this is going to be subtly different in the final game. But because we went ahead and we put this white worker over here on the face-up cheese, similar to the way this recipe card shows, we can go ahead and make that cheese, and we can go ahead and put it onto our board in the fromagerie area like so. These recipe cards are going to score you. You're going to score for having full sets across, and you're going to score for having various sets downwards depending on the cheeses you have. So we have that down over there. We've placed our 2 workers over here, and now again we're going to go ahead and rotate the board for the 3rd turn. I'll take one more turn and then we'll start explaining how everything scores. Right about now, you'll notice that over here, these 2 workers are still out of play. This worker, on the other hand, I'm going to get back right now, which means for the first time, I'll be taking a 1 worker turn. This is a good time for me to start making decisions. Do I want to try to get some buildings over here, or do I want to focus on here, or maybe I ignore the bistro in favor of trying to, as I said already, it does help you to a degree to focus on ignoring one area to be able to have stronger actions in other areas, and I think I'll go ahead and do that. So right about now, I'm going to put both of these workers, I'm going to put this worker over here to be able to take 3 buildings, which will enable me to go ahead and place these 2 down over here. And I'm going to go ahead and put those down here, and that completed this building, which means when I gain buildings, I can instead gain wild resources, which is going to be very helpful. It's also worth noting I have the grinding room over here, which means my orange worker can make yellow or can make white or blue cheese. My yellow worker can make white or blue cheese. That's going to be that, and then again, we'll rotate the board. So effectively, as you place the game, you're placing your workers down once into this area, and again, optional, and then once into the area in front of you, and this is going to be a resource area where you can get recipe cards that will score for having various recipe cards as you achieve the results. You can go over here to get various building markers, which will go onto buildings to complete your buildings and give you the various options that your buildings have, of which is worth noting we have a giant stack of these buildings. There's 2 ways to play the game. You can play with your pre-printed buildings on the board, or you can go ahead and draft buildings, and then when you draft buildings, you're going to be drafting from this giant pile of unique buildings in order to give you your own customized little setup for the game and how it operates. So you're trying to build those buildings with those. The strawberries over here will help be used to be able to pay for any strawberry or jam cost that you have on the board. When you pay a strawberry cost, you move it to the left. When you pay a jam cost, you move it to the right, and you're going to score for these at the end of the game, multiplying your jam by your strawberries. So that's another strong way to get points if you can optimize around it. And lastly, you'll get these animals over here, which you're going to place the livestock onto your board. And again, this is a little different visually, but currently in the current state of the game, the livestock can be traded into various milking yards where you can get extra bonus cheese placement. So as you gather livestock, you'll be able to slowly save them up and then cash them in for getting extra cheese placement onto the board, which will help you accelerate the end game because game end is triggered when a player has placed all of their cheese on the board. So that's kind of covering a bunch of the core resources. As far as the various regions on the board, the regions of the board all score a bit differently. And again, prototypes, so some things are different. But in this area over here in the bistro, some of the setup over here has slightly changed. But the general idea is you're going to score for every table you've completed. As you place different cheeses onto tables, you'll complete them, and you're going to score for completed tables multiplied by the number of points each table is worth. Right now it's a little different visually, but you're going to score for the number of points each table is worth times the number of completed tables that you have. Over here in this region over here, you're going to score for area control. Whoever has the most cheeses in different areas, so let's go ahead and just throw some down over here. So whoever has the most cheeses in different areas, so for example, right now, in this area over here, you'll see that blue currently has a majority of the central region, so blue's going to take these trucks, and each truck is worth 2 points. If there's a tie, they would each take 1 truck, and each truck is worth 2 points. So over here, you're playing an area control game, and you'll notice that the cheeses that come back to you later, the ones that take more time to cycle back, are in better areas. So a cheese that interweaves 3 different regions is coming back to you in 3 turns, in 2 different regions, 2 turns, and in 1 region is going to come back to you next turn. So you have to balance that as you place these out in different areas. And over here in the festival over here, you're going to be scoring for interlinked cheeses. So for example, if I have a cheese down over here, and a cheese down over here, and a cheese down over, let's go ahead and put this out, and a cheese down over here, the way it works is you score for your connected cheeses, and let's put one down over here, like so over here. So you're going to score for your connected cheeses, but you do count these spots over here as always connected to everyone. So right now I'd get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 connected cheeses, which over here is going to be worth 15 points. And then separately, I have this one cheese on its own, which is going to be worth, well, nothing because it's just one cheese. So you're going to be scoring for connected cheeses in this area. Over here, you're going to be scoring for the number of different shelves you are present on. You can see over here, you can get up to 6 shelves, and you can score 20 points for being present on different shelves. And additionally, as you place things, you're going to get various rewards as well in the Fromage review over there. So you're trying to balance all of these things. Meanwhile, the recipe cards, like I mentioned already, those are going to score for the number of recipe cards you have across, as well as for the recipe icons over here. You're going to be scoring. Some recipe cards will have icons that will give you additional scoring mechanisms multiplied by the number that you have downwards. So you're going to be placing those recipe cards out. You can get multiplied by the number of cheeses you have in a column by the scoring icons. So you can score both for going downwards as well as for scoring across. And you're also going to score for the cheese multiplied by the jam, like I mentioned already. And then for over here, if I finish my warehouse at game end, I'll get an extra turn, which can be incredibly useful if I can take it right and optimize around that. But that's basically how you play Fromage. You are placing out workers every single turn. One worker is going to be getting you core resources, one worker is being mindful of the scoring region that's going on in the game, and you're trying to optimize around that as you place out all your cheeses onto the board, trying to optimize the best cheese placement and the best cheese making in all of wherever this is from. I don't know where. I guess France? Probably France, right? It seems like it's probably in France. In any case, that is how you play the game, which means it's time to dive into the review, starting off with ease of play. Past the prototype issues, because again, this is a game that I've played this on TTS and I've played it in person, but I have to play it in person while kind of trying to ignore the stuff that's different in TTS. And since then, some things have even changed. For example, the way this region scores, I haven't even played with the most recent scoring rules of how the bistro plays. This is a game that's in motion. It's a work in progress, and things are changing as we go. So I can only comment on my plays of the game. I can't comment on some of the small tweaks, and things are adjusted for that. But past that, the game itself was not the hardest to get up and running. It's worker placement with a little bit of a twist as far as how the workers are coming back to you and things like that. But if you know worker placement games, if you've played variable point scoring games, this has a lot of core elements that are familiar. It's just the way that they come together that's all different. As far as game time, games run around 45 minutes. It can vary, but around 45 minutes for me so far. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, to start with the variable setup in the game, which is one thing you don't even necessarily see the way you are right now, but these board regions, they come completely out. So this sort of region, let's go ahead and take this out over here. Well, when I say completely out, probably should take everything off first. But over here, when you take this off and we slip this out over here, these board regions can be set up differently, so you have different patterns of how everything is connected, which will give you slightly different puzzles. You'll also have this region over here, this thing, which can be oriented differently, which will again change slightly how you're trying to tie in different things together as you go. You also have the drafting of the buildings. For me, that very first game I played, I used the basic stock buildings on a player board, but after that, it's all been drafting because the buildings are more interesting, and it starts your game off with a bang. It starts your game off with already making decisions around, ooh, which sets of buildings do I think will work well with the engine I'm working for? And so that already gives you a nice little twist. Do I go for cheaper buildings, more expensive buildings, a mix of them? How do they all combine? What do I want to do in this game, and how will those enable me? And so I already like the variable setup, the variable buildings. Those just start you off the gate with just different things to be mindful of. I like the fact that the game scales well at different player counts. Whether you're playing it at 2 players or at 4 players, the simultaneous play, the fact that you're all taking your turns and then rotating, just to rotate it clockwise, the fact that you're all taking your turns and then rotating is going to force you to, not force you, but it's going to mean that you're not taking it's not a longer game at 4 players, or at least it's not marginally longer. It's only a drop longer because of the fact that you're all taking turns simultaneously. It's only as slow as the slowest player rather than just taking turns as you go, and so that's a nice little element that's added to the game as well. You cannot get everything done in this game, which I generally like in games. It's always a fine line for me, because if I can't do enough, I feel frustrated, and if I can get everything done, I feel bored. This game does hit that line where you can get enough done where you're like, okay, great, I scored 2 regions really well, a 3rd region okay, and then I kind of ignored 1 region. You have that presently in this game as you go. You're just inherently limited by the number of cheese you have. You can't do everything, and so trying to figure out what your regions are going to score with, and that decision is also dependent upon the number of players. If you let a single player, if you're playing a 2-player game and you let a single player snowball the area control over here, that's going to be a hard thing for you. But this area, on the other hand, might be worth ignoring in a 4-player game. And it is true that the different boards over here, they are already adjusted for a player count, but nonetheless, it's still just having no one vie or no one complete in a 2-player game is going to let someone else steamroll that area. So you have decisions to make about where to give your attention to, what to focus on, and in what order to do things as well. Getting some building tokens out very early can really help you benefit from your buildings. Getting some recipe cards can help you give you direction as far as how you score those out. Getting early placement on the board in these spots over here can really help you as you're trying to chain things together. And so everything has to be considered as you go. There's lots of ways to score. There's the 4 different regions on the board. There's going to be the jam multiplied by the strawberries over here. There's also going to be the the recipe cards as you place them out. There are a bunch of things that are scoring in this game, and it's up to you to try to figure out that pathway of what connects to what's the most efficient, what's ultimately giving you all these, what's giving you the most efficient return on your game. As far as things I don't like in the game, first of all, I will say thematically and visually, this isn't as much to my personal interest. I recognize it as good art, just it's more drab, it's more laid back, it's not as much to my personal taste in visual aesthetic of gaming or whatnot. But more importantly, I'll say that the scoring in each region doesn't change much game to game. As much as I like the variability of the order of the regions, or the buildings you'll have in play, or things like that, or the way this will connect, the actual choices you make in a given region don't change much game to game. And also I'll say that even this doesn't heavily change up the way I interact with the game state. Meaning in the bistro, you're very often trying to do the same thing. In the villas, you're trying to do the same thing. In the festival, you're trying to do the same thing. And so while there are changes because of the order, and there are changes because of the building, and there is reacting to what your opponents are doing, the individual regions usually have the same kind of focus, and so that does mean that this game both has variability, but also sameness within the variability, if that makes sense. So once you get a few games under your belt, to a certain extent, some things are kind of locked in the patterns you're pursuing, and then from there it's just about optimization and trying to figure out the slight nuances of how to slightly combine this with that, or draft different buildings that can help my engine. You are always trying to seek to improve your score, at least relative to the other players, but to some extent, some of the things you're doing are somewhat samey within each region. As far as things I can see others not liking, first of all, the worker placement aspect can be confusing. Those workers that are rotating around the board and coming back to you, oh, look at that, now it's over here, now it's facing me, it comes back to you, that is a confusing mechanic that isn't immediately intuitive, and it takes a few turns to kind of grok what's happening, to understand exactly how these workers come back to you. And the important thing is, the longer it takes you to understand, the more you run into the risk of having turns where your workers are gone because you didn't plan out the right sequence of ensuring, because you have 3 workers effectively, and you can only place out 2 a turn, so inherently you always have some leeway to place something that's not coming back to you right away. But if you take advantage of that too much, you'll have turns where you don't have any workers left, which could be punishing. Because of the fact that you do kind of want to skip some regions to optimize in others to a degree, there is some tolerance around these kinds of things, but you really want to be walking into it planning your actions, planning your absences, as opposed to just having them happen. And because the worker placement is confusing, it's the kind of thing you might want to like start playing, and then depending on how things are going in, like 3 or 4 turns in, you may want to consider resetting if players haven't really got it, and they're otherwise just, sign themselves up for a long game that they started off on a bad foot. I'll also say that you almost intentionally have to take some bad turns to optimize around the game, which we talked about already. And those 2 things kind of go hand in hand to a degree, so one actually helps the other. But in this game, because of the nature of the fact that you really don't score as efficiently if you spread out evenly, you kind of sometimes have to be like, well, I'm just going to, not bother placing anything in this region. Although the flip side of that is if you do that too much, you won't get the scoring bonus of having all 4 recipe cards in each region, because you do need to place out cheese in those regions. So you're constantly struggling with different things about when to slightly do something inefficient. Do I place down a cheese in the villas over here, which might get me something, but it might get me that recipe card, but there's a lot of these decisions to be made as you go through it, and some of them are very tactically enjoyable, others feel a little less satisfying as you make them. As far as final thoughts on Fromage, I overall enjoy most of this game, with the main caveat being that I feel the region-to-region scoring does feel samey game to game. The rest of it I like. The rest of it is a lot of fun. The simultaneous worker placement, the fact that you have these drafted buildings, that's like, I still haven't played with most of the buildings over here, just because, my first game was the standard buildings, and from there's so many buildings, I haven't even seen half the buildings, and so those give you a high degree of variability to the small, nuanced adjustments you're making. Each region gives you a slightly different puzzle to solve, and it is fun to try to optimize within those, again with the caveat that my biggest complaint is that a few games in, it starts to feel a little bit samey within each region. I think it's one of those things that a lot of Euro games try to heavily interact everything with each other, which does mean that there's more consequence to the way things will play out game to game. In Fromage, the regions very often do feel isolated. Past the resource gathering is present, of course, but past that, very often the regions feel isolated, which means you don't have that sense of everything cascading together. You have to be mindful of all the actions you're taking as a full picture, but every region scores on its own in isolation, and that does mean that lack of interweaving, I think that's the thing that holding the game back for me a drop. The lack of interweaving areas means there's less consequence to how you do or don't engage with one region over another, and that means that across multiple games, some elements of the game feel samey, while others still feel highly variable. So mostly things I enjoy. That one element, I kind of wish things interweaved or interacted more, so that it have more consequence and thus more variety as you play the game. So overall for me, Fromage is a 3.5 out of 5. A lot of things that are very fun. fun, a lot of things that are very rewarding. That one element holds it back for me, but it is a big element, so it holds it back, you know, a 1.5 for me from the score. Past that, as far as other game recommendations, first of all, if you're looking for a game that has a degree of, well, rotating things, but not really this, and also worker placement, but a whole lot more interlinking, interweaving, everything, Tzolk'in from CGE has, well, a whole lot more complexity to it. A very heavy Euro game that has a lot to think about and very punishing mentally to try to get everything done in that game. And if you like the concept of making cheese and you want a little bit of alcohol to go along with it, Distilled is a game that's going to have you focusing on making and brewing your own alcohol, which is very thematically different than this one. There's not a lot of, very mechanically different. There's not a lot of overlap in the actual mechanics game to game, but both of them have you focusing on that, you know, thematic aspect of making a food that you enjoy. In any case, then until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.